So welcome everybody again. This is the panel on working at international development banks. My name is Scott Webb. I am a career and academic advisor with the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. I've been working here for about 8.5 years. I advise students in the policy and development, Master of Public Administration, and international trade programs. I'm also an alumni of the Middlebury Institute when it was the Monterey Institute of International Studies. Some people may know us as that. We got acquired by Middlebury College about 15 years ago. So we have a lot of policy degrees in things like non-proliferation and terrorism studies, environmental policy management. We have an MPA, obviously, policy and development, trade school. I mean, not trade school, but trade policy. We also have the other half of our school is mostly translation and interpretation. We have one of the best interpretation and translation schools in the world. And so it's been an interesting environment to be here because we have events where, the event's in Russian and it's simultaneously interpreted into English. It can be an exciting place to be to host events. So very excited to work with my NASPAA colleagues on providing these panels. A couple of weeks ago, we had the DC virtual trek that you're all welcome to check out. We have recordings of almost everything. You can find those here. I'm going to share that document with you all. But I want to get to the panelists. We've got a really great panel here. Currently, we have 3 guests with us here today. We've got Anthony Randazzo, Managing Director of Social Enterprise and Finance at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. We've got Mr. Bamba Diop. He's the Environmental Specialist at the African Development Bank. And we've got Himanshi Jain. I hope I said your name right. She's a Senior Social Protection Specialist at the World Bank Group. So I think so our goal today is basically just to talk about careers. If you have issues with the policies of any of the banks, you might be able to bring those up in a chat, but I want to keep the focus on getting a job and the career journey of our panelists. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll sort of bank them for later, no pun intended. We can try and answer them in the chat, or we could answer them orally if there's time. So I'll have each panelist tell us their story, and then maybe talk about anything unique to their career that they can share. A reminder to the panelists that this is for all NASPAA policy schools. So these are all people getting an MPA or an MPP, a Master of Public Policy. So some of them go on to get PhDs. Some of them treat these degrees as their terminal degrees. So so let's start with Himanshi. She's a Senior Social Protection Specialist in the Pensions, Disability, and Social Insurance GSG of the Global Social Protection and Jobs team at the World Bank. She joined the World Bank in 2017. She joined the bank in 2017 and has since worked in technical and operational roles in South Asia, East Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Her interests include evaluation of formal sector pension schemes, formulating policies to expanding coverage to the informal sector, and research on aging and healthier working lives. Himanshi holds a master's in public policy from Duke University, a master's in quantitative economics from the Indian Statistical Institute, and is a member of professional actuarial societies in India and the United States. So Himanshi, I'd love to hear, tell us about your current job, how you got to where you are, how did you get to work there, especially after finishing graduate school? I'd love to hear your story.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So what I do at the bank, and, we have multiple units in the bank, but I'm not going to try and bore you with those details. But essentially what I do is I advise a lot of ministries of finance about, their pension expenditures, about their long-term care expenditures, all the things that really matter on their bottom line quite a bit. And, we advise them on the kinds of reform options that, they should maybe consider carrying out that is, poor, but is also more equitable. So a lot of my work is very technical, but it uses a lot of my statistical and policy analysis skills. Something in the bank that we really focus on is also how to deal with countries that are aging very rapidly. The demographic change that countries are witnessing. On one hand, you have some countries that are still rather young, but then there are some countries like in Europe, where I am right now, they're aging very rapidly. So, different countries, different problems, and we need to sort of understand the context fairly quickly. So that's sort of a teaser on what I do, how I got here. So when I worked at Duke, I think one of the things that I often heard, and I'm sure a lot of students still hear, is it's actually, it is fairly competitive in the international development space. There are relatively few roles. And, when I started off, it was very clear to me that I had to do really heavily work on my networking skills. Not something that I'm used to doing a lot, given my background and studying was a lot in India. So the way I got my first job was actually a networking event in DC that was arranged by my school. And in the last 10 minutes of that networking dinner, someone who is an alumni of the Sanford School walked in, and she works at the bank. And so I got literally like a couple of minutes to give my elevator pitch to her. And it just so happened that I mentioned that I do have an actuarial background, and that stuck with her. And she said, you know what, I know nothing about what actuaries do, but I read a blog by a colleague on the bank website that mentioned this word. So why don't I put you in touch with him? And one thing after the other, after sort of 3 follow-ups, I found someone who was interested in my profile and who gave me an internship. And during the internship, he quite liked my work. And as soon as I graduated, I got a staff position, which I must say I got very lucky to get a staff position right after graduation. So this is a very unique story, but what I want to get out of this is sort of 4 lessons, which in hindsight, I feel worked for me. First is, remember that you only need one person to open the door, right? So you've got to try, and then one thing clicks. Second, even if, one door closes, and actually this happened with me, where one of the people I spoke to said, you have an excellent profile, but you know what, my job isn't that fun. And someone at your age, you have a lot to learn, go work somewhere else. But I didn't give up at that point. I kept reaching out. And with every informational interview, I think what worked is I would always end by asking them, can they connect me to someone else? Or can they tell me something about the bank and how it works? So by the time I was on the 3rd or 4th person, I had a very good sense of how the bank works, what are the kinds of skill sets they look for. I even knew what kinds of contracts they sign, for younger staff. So I was very prepared. The third thing I would say was sort of reflect on what is your unique value proposition. I know for someone coming out of master's, this is sometimes hard to figure out. For me, I guess it was my actuarial skill set which distinguished me from everyone else in my group. We're all, excellent students. They all are A+ in every subject. So what is that unique value proposition you have? Maybe it's, you work on gender issues. Maybe, you're really passionate on climate, but it has to be one thing that people can then link you up on. And the last thing I would say is, once you land a job or any small assignment, just go all out and make an impression. I remember being given tasks like just formatting an Excel file sometimes at the bank. And I would always say, okay, can I do something here that's going to wow them? And the small things really add up, and people really do pay heed to those things. And now, I now have at least 4 or 5 people who work with me, and I do the same. I do notice on who's going that extra mile to make their work just a little bit more professional. So yeah, let me stop there.
Thank you, Himanshi. Those are great tips, all of them. You mentioned before we fully went live that you are in Macedonia. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing there?
Yes. So in Macedonia, the government spends around 8 to 9% of GDP on pensions. So it's a big expenditure, and they're aging very rapidly. So we have been called in because there's a lot of pressure to keep increasing pensions. It's a political hot topic issue. And so we've been called in to sort of think of how to maybe improve pension adequacy without necessarily, increasing the costs quite a bit. So we are teaching, very senior policymakers some of the modeling tools that we use to enact different policy reform options, and that helps them estimate what the costs and the equity impacts would be. So yeah, a technical way to say we're trying to help them spend money better.
Oh, that's great. I have one more question for you, Amanchi. When you were a student, were you an international student here on an F1 or?
Yes,
and
I was.
how was that navigating OPT or, work after?
So the really great thing, and maybe one of the reasons why I really wanted a job in the bank, is because all UN agencies, including World Bank and any UN agency, so UNICEF, UNESCO, UNDP, they all offer what is called a G4 visa. So you do not have to worry about all the visa issues that often come in when you're trying to get a job with a US employer. So from day one, and it doesn't matter whether you have a staff position or you have a contract for just 20 days, the bank sponsors your visa, and it's a very quick process. So they just give you a letter and you go to the embassy and you get your visa. So one of the reasons why I was so passionately looking for a position in the bank is because the visa process is really simplified for an F1 visa holder like me.
That is great. That's really good to hear. I know a lot of international students are always, that's top of mind for all of them. Thank you, Amanchi, very much. We'll definitely be able to have you answer questions later as they come up. Because it's very late where he is also, I want to talk to Mr. Bamba Diop. Bamba, also before we go further, our colleague Jessica Isaacs has joined us. Jessica is a U.S. Deputy Director for Multilateral Development Banks at the U.S. Treasury Department and a former U.S. Executive Director at the Board of the African Development Bank. So one of her former colleagues, Mr. Bamba Diop, it's like very late where he is. So he's a national of Senegal who received 2 master's degrees from Duke University and Wisconsin University, respectively, in international development policy and conservation biology. He joined the African Development Bank in 2005. Over the past 18 years, he's managed a portfolio of 26 different major programs and projects in natural resource management, covering all regions in Africa, totaling $619 million US, addressing major issues and threats in the sectors of environment, agriculture, climate change, and energy. He's currently the African Development Bank focal point for the following major international organizations: the World Conservation Union, African Wildlife Foundation, the Wetlands International. And before joining the African Development Bank, Bamba worked as a research assistant at the Land Tenure Center, at the University of Wisconsin, to develop environmental observatories in 12 countries. So I know I have a lot of students here that are interested in environmental policy, and working at a bank doing international development and focusing on climate change in Africa. It's the best of many worlds for many students. So Bamba, we'd love to hear your career journey story.
Thank you very much, Scott, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm here in Dakar, Senegal, and I think it's 9:00 p.m. right now here. But a great pleasure that I have been contacted by Carmela LaBianca, as a Duke student alumni, and I was telling her that this is the least I can give back by having the chance to study in the US, in North Carolina, and in Wisconsin. So what I can tell you about myself, I studied, my undergrad here in Senegal, in Dakar, and had the chance to have a small scholarship to learn English. So I was sent in Indiana University, Bloomington, just to do what we call English as a second language. So after I finished it, I think the English was not that great, so I had to improve it. And I was sent to UNC, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I think there my English got improved. And I saw a nice program at Duke University, which is a PIDP, Program of International Development Policy. So I used to go there because UNC and Duke are very close, although they sometimes fight in basketball. So I got the chance to get admitted there. But my admission, when I got it, I was in Senegal. And the main obstacle was, I mean, the scholarship. I mean, the US, I think the particularity is how expensive are the studies. So I get the chance to have a scholarship from the African Development Bank to come and undertake my master at Duke University. So I did international development policy, which focused on environment. And the first lesson to me, and I think can profit those who are the participants who are right now online, is the way that I understood environment was the policy aspect and the science aspect. So from Duke, I think I gained this policy aspect, but the missing link was the scientific aspect, so which is related to biology. So that's why I applied also at the Environment School of UW, University of Wisconsin, and get admitted to undertake another master. So environment, the way that I perceive it was to have the policy background and the science background. So after I finished my degree, I think my chance was just, I mean, like everybody, like the participants are doing, sending email to everywhere. And when I applied for the African Development Bank, I think it was not my target. My target was to finish my studies and go back to Senegal to enter the administration. So, but by chance, I remember, this is a small story. I got this email to be invited for an interview. And after 2 days, I didn't respond to that email because the way that I was thinking was I have to pay my ticket to go to Tunis. At that time, the bank was based, the headquarters was in Tunis, Tunisia. A couple of days, they called me, and it was even nighttime because of the different hours. And they asked me if I'm interested about this interview. I say, yeah, I'm interested, but I am here in the US, in Wisconsin. So I don't think I can afford to come to Tunis for an interview. They say, no. They will pay the ticket. I say, oh, really? And I think it was a month of February or January, very cold in Wisconsin, snow everywhere. So now I'm going to get the chance to go back to Africa just for an interview. So that was a pleasure. So I went, I did my interview, and everything worked out. One lesson was the bank was not very focused on environment. They were doing environment, but on the safeguards, meaning that every project they have in agriculture, the bank was more focused on agriculture and infrastructure. So they have to do all these safeguards measures in order to minimize the impact, etc. So, but me, my focus was conservation biology, so wildlife, forest, etc. And I think for the participants, if you get to this big institution, sometimes they have focus. I don't know what the focus of World Bank, but every institution, most of the time, they have a core agenda. And for the African Development Bank at the time was agriculture and infrastructure, a little bit education. So for me, so I was feeling kind of alone there. So I think the thing that I did was just to contact this environmental organizations that I know, like IUCN, and invite them, let them know that I am here. So we were discussing about an agenda. They get even invited in Tunis. We had a small workshop. And from there, we were identifying the niche. And at the time that I'm talking to you, we have invested a lot in biodiversity conservation, mostly in Central Africa, where you have the Congo rainforest. And we're doing a lot of work right now in Southern Africa in ecotourism. So things are getting a little bit diversified in environment. So the environment I am doing right now is more focused on operations. So we have environment for the safeguard that is becoming a huge unit, but we have also environment that is more dealing with this kind of projects that you have in those countries. So Scott, I don't want to get too long. I don't know. I mean, if they have questions or you, I will be more than happy to develop more. Thank you.
Thank you, Bamba. That's great. Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to you with other questions, especially because it's interesting. I want to move on to Jessica because she formerly collaborated with the African Development Bank. So yeah, if I could introduce Jessica Isaacs. She is the U.S. Deputy Director for Multilateral Development Banks at the U.S. Treasury Department. which is a U.S. agency that oversees U.S. participation and engagement across the MDB system. So from 2020 to 2023, Jess was in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, serving as an acting U.S. executive director at the board of the African Development Bank from 2017 to 2020. She represented the U.S. at the board of the World Bank, where she was the lead on the International Development Association. Jess joined Treasury's Energy and Environment Office as a presidential management fellow after graduating from Duke's MPP program in 2013, and covered the Green Climate Fund, G7, G20 climate and energy, and bilateral negotiations, and spent 6 months at the International Energy Agency in Paris on detail. Prior to Duke, she worked in the renewable energy sector and completed a Fulbright fellowship in Taiwan. She has a bachelor's degree in public policy from Scripps College. So thank you, Jess, for joining us. That is a really cool background. I'd love to hear more about your journey. It looks like you've gone back and forth between government and multilateral organization. It's interesting to see that from an American person going back and forth. I'd love to hear more about your career journey.
Sure, I shouldn't have sent the bio because it gave too much away about.
Yeah, I gave it all away.
But as you said, I finished my MPP at Duke in 2013, so 10 years ago, and I was focused then on energy and international development. And so I want to start by anyone who might be American on the call and interested in working in the federal government. The Presidential Management Fellowship Program is a really great way to get your foot into the door. It, of course, is famously hard to become a federal employee, but the PMF program is a really great way. And I think the first piece of advice I would have from that experience is being open-minded sometimes about your career path. When I was at Duke, the idea of working at the U.S. Treasury Department was nowhere in my mental landscape. I was thinking about working at State Department or USAID or something like that. But then over the course of interviewing for PMF positions, Treasury contacted me, and I found out about this really interesting set of work that Treasury does, international development, overseeing several $1 billion a year in U.S. contributions to the institutions. And it's been a really interesting career path for me. So that's piece of advice one is you don't always know everything that's out there, and having an open landscape might give you more opportunities to find an interesting position. So as Scott mentioned, I sort of have two tracks in a way, but I thought I'd just explain a little bit how that works. So all of these multilateral development banks are what we'd call a shareholding institution. So the governments that are members sort of own the institutions to some degree, and they have boards that are resident at the institutions. And the boards are really high-level decision-making, strategic direction setting parts of the institution. And so when I was at the World Bank and when I was at the African Development Bank, 3 years each at those boards, I was employed by those organizations, but I was there representing the United States government. So I was sent there by US Treasury, not by, through some competitive hiring process within that institution. But I mean, they're very interesting jobs because you are looking at the whole institution from the top down, thinking about the strategic decisions that you need to have the organization, what direction you want the organization to go, how to work with all of the other shareholders of the institution to set priorities to address the global needs that we identify. So it's been an interesting set of positions. And then just recently I've come back to Treasury where I'm overseeing that work across the system, and specifically for the regional development banks, European, Asian, Inter-American, and African development banks. So one thing I was going to mention about all of them is that most of the multilateral development banks have something called a Young Professionals Program. And that is a great place to look at if you are interested in working at one of these organizations, because the YP programs are sort of pipelines for young people who are, I think, they have caps from somewhere 30, 32 years, something like that. So they're really intended for younger professionals who've completed generally a master's program at least, to get into the organization and get a lot of capacity development, mentoring, and other programming to help you start a career in an MDB. When I was at the African Development Bank board, I worked a lot with the African Development Bank's Young Professionals Program. I think we had a cohort of 35 people who joined the bank, and it gave them a great opportunity to rotate through the organization and kind of figure out the right career path for them. So if you're interested in working in MBB, I'd consider looking up the YP program for the MBB that you'd like to work at. And then I think the last thing I was going to just mention, Scott, you sent a couple questions in advance, and I was thinking about the hard skills versus soft skills question. And I know Himanshi has been sending a couple of messages about that in the chat. My perspective on this, both as someone who's hired for the US government and also for the MDBs sometimes, is the hard skills are a basic thing that you need to get into the door for a lot of these positions. Having on your resume, having on your transcript that you were doing challenging hard skills, whether that's econometrics, whether that's statistics, that's going to set your resume in a position where people are going to be interested in what you bring. But I think you have to also have the soft skills once you actually get in the door. So I think you need the hard skills to sort of start having the conversation, but you really need to have the soft skills too, because so many of the positions in organizations like this are representational, which means you have to go out and you need to speak on behalf of whether it's the US government or the African Development Bank and put a positive impression. So that's all I was going to say about that, and I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thank you, Jess. That's great. And I appreciate you bringing that up with the young professionals. I put the link for a couple of young professional programs. This is incredibly easily Googleable. So just put in the name of the development bank and young professionals program. That's generally what they're called at all the other places. There's usually age limits. So, it's definitely meant for youth. Sometimes they're targeted towards specific countries, as from what I've seen, in particular with the UN. But yeah, let's move to Anthony. We've already covered everything, so I guess we are going to just have to let you go. No, just kidding. Yeah, I'm excited to hear from Anthony. He's a CFA. He's an impact investment professional who spent his entire career at the intersection of international finance and development. He currently serves as a managing director at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, where he manages a team of investment professionals who conduct credit analysis on debt investment in social enterprises and impact investment funds across a range of sectors and geographies. Earlier in his career, he worked in the field of international consulting, managed a multi-year USAID-funded technical assistance program for central banks in the Western Balkans. He later worked as an investment officer for two impact investment asset managers, Triple Jump and Calvert Impact Capital, before joining the DFC. Anthony's the creator of the Impact Money blog, an independent source of information about impact investing and social entrepreneurship. He holds a BA in International Econ from UCLA and a Master of Arts in International Relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, aka SICE. So Anthony, I'd love to hear more about your journey. And I'll put the link to your blog in the chat.
Great, thank you very much. So I currently work at the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, which is the US government's development finance institution. I work on origination, which means I'm an investment officer. Actually, I'm now a managing director, so I manage a team of investment officers, but what we do is prospect for deals and conduct due diligence on them, and then recommend investments to investment committees. And once they're approved, we work on the legal documentation to get them dispersed. So I've been doing that for the last 11 years and really enjoy what I do. My journey started, I guess, when I was at SICE at Johns Hopkins. I was studying East European studies, and that's because I knew I wanted to work in Eastern Europe. I knew I wanted to do something that was developmental, but I didn't know that I was going to work in development finance as a career. And I started off, I was very fortunate to start working in development consulting. I did that for 10 years. Based in Eastern Europe, mostly the Western Balkans, including Macedonia, where Himanshi is currently, working to implement a USAID-funded technical assistance program. We're working with central banks in these newly independent countries. It's a very fascinating time to be in Eastern Europe as it was transitioning from communism and to democratic systems and free market capitalism. Also post-conflict in the case of former Yugoslavia. And I did that for about 10 years. And I think at a certain point, I realized that, while the work was very interesting, I wanted to do something that was much more tangible. And to Himanshu's point, also develop a technical skill that could be very valuable in the job market. In development consulting, I was mostly doing project management, and I really wanted to develop a technical skill. And I knew I wanted to switch into development finance, but I didn't have the financial skills. SAIS offers some great courses in financial analysis and corporate finance, but I did not take any of them when I was a student. And so I think that would be my first piece of advice to all the students. If you know you want to go into development finance, look for ways to develop those financial analytical skills now. What I did was I did the CFA program, which is offered by the CFA Institute, the Chartered Financial Analyst Program, which is a very rigorous and very well-respected program for people who want to work in, careers involving financial analysis. So I did the CFA program, and then I transitioned into development finance, initially working for Triple Jump, which is a asset manager in the impact investing space in the Netherlands. And then I got a job working for Calvert Impact Capital here in Washington, D.C. And the opportunity at the DFC came up in my second year at Calvert. I wasn't looking to change jobs, but a position opened up at the DFC on their impact investing team. And I knew people there through my work at Calvert because there were a lot of overlapping investments that we were doing together. So when I started investigating it, I knew the people over there, and I think my only reluctance was I'd always worked in the private sector up until that point, and so I wasn't sure that I wanted to work for a U.S. government agency, and so I did quite a bit of due diligence on the DFC, and I realized it's a very nimble and very well-regarded agency to work for within the U.S. government. And the team that I would be working for also had a very good reputation. But I think the clincher for me was the ability to work on much larger transactions and the ability to make investments as an anchor investor that would mobilize other private sector investors alongside our investment. And so the ability to mobilize the capital, make larger investments was really meaningful to me because at the end of the day, I enjoy the work that I do because I feel like, moving money into developing countries is very tangible, it's very impactful, and it really motivates me knowing that the investments that we're making really benefit people living in poverty in developing countries. And so in hindsight, I think it was a no-brainer. It just took me a while to wrap my head around it.
That's great. And what are you working on right now? Like what's on your plate right now?
So in India, I'm working on a couple of transactions. India just recently passed extended producer responsibility regulations, which has really helped to enable and de-risk the plastic recycling sector. So working on a couple of plastic recycling transactions there that will help scale up India's ability to address plastic waste, which is a huge problem in India. So turning that plastic waste into a purely recyclable material. So the laws in India require that the brand owners take the plastic waste, recycle it, and turn it back into food grade quality plastic that can be then used to create bottles over and over. So that's an interesting transaction I've worked on. I'm currently working on. And then I've got a couple of other transactions in the water and sanitation space. So working with a fund manager called Water Equity, where they invest through microfinance institutions to deliver microloans so that people can use the money to gain access to clean water and sanitation in developing countries. So they're just a couple of examples of transactions that I've worked on recently.
That's great. Thank you, Anthony. I have a question kind of generally for the panel. I have had a lot of students looking at jobs at the World Bank. I mean, a lot of students come in like, I just want to work at the World Bank. It's more of like the idea of working at the World Bank, not like something very specific that they want to accomplish. And then they find that, a PhD might be necessary, or, there's a lot of people that get hired at these banks, any of the development banks, that have doctorates. And I'm wondering, I don't think any of you have PhDs, right? Yeah. So, and which is why I'm excited to talk to you and have you talk to these students. But like, how important is how does a PhD change the options you have at a development bank? And do you need a PhD to go further at a higher level or do different kinds of work? Like how would you be able to speak to that a little bit, one of you?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. I mean, I think we've seen over time the number of people who have a PhD working at these institutions has declined because the focus of the institutions is less on hard macroeconomics and maybe a bit broader. So if you want to work at the IMF, you probably need a PhD. If you want to work at the World Bank or one of the other institutions, I think it's only something like 20% of the staff who might have a PhD, and those are going to be people who are working in parts of the bank where a PhD is really important. But there's a lot of work that people who have master's degrees are very well equipped to do, and that would include, a lot of the work in the project preparation, in country strategies. So I'd say a PhD is really not necessarily, unless what you want to be doing is maybe participating in the part of the bank that we call the knowledge bank. If you want to be producing independent research, if you want to be the lead macroeconomist for Ghana, maybe you need a PhD. But for a lot of the work that people really think about when they think of the World Bank, those or the other MBBs, those are not PhD level positions.
Yeah, looked like Emanchi unmuted first.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Jessica here. I think in the bank, increasingly, in fact, the fact that what is happening in the bank especially is we're realizing there's a lot of these interlinked development challenges. Okay, so I work on pensions, but I have to talk labor markets and I have to talk fiscal policy, which sometimes I somehow feel that because I had a master's degree and that allowed me to touch upon a variety of subjects, it actually makes me a bit more well-rounded. I once had a colleague who's a PhD and who's working in projects, and he's like, I worked so deep and hard looking at labor markets, it's very hard for me to get out of that hole and to look for the second best and the third best and the fourth best solutions. And to be honest, in the countries we work in the context we work in, what you study in school as the theoretically first best solution is not what's going to fly, maybe either politically or technically. So you have to be willing to work on the fifth, sixth best solution. And you have to do it with a lot of other colleagues who are working with you. So, and again, Jessica said this point, I think, analytical skills is going to get you in the door, but teamwork is such a critical piece. I mean, when we call sort of bank trips that we go to, it's a 7-8 folks, all with different expertise, working to advise the government. And you just have to work together. There's no way around it. There's no way that one person has expertise on all of these areas. And believe it or not, it starts showing after a while whether you are a team player or not. So I used to think it's a bit of a cliche. They ask you, oh, when did you struggle with a task and how did you handle it? But I get it now. I think the way you answer this question, the way you think about teamwork really starts showing in your job. So PhD in the bank, if you want to work in DEC, if you want to do impact evaluations, yes, you need a PhD. But if not, I'd say 80% of our business is about loans and, analytical work.
Yeah, Anthony,
I would just say that at the DFC, to my knowledge, we don't have any PhDs. There might be one or two that I'm not aware of, but I think the types of degrees that we typically, look for, I think international relations, definitely international public affairs, for sure. Oftentimes we'll see people with a dual degree. For example, SAIS and Wharton offers a dual degree in international relations plus MBA. We have people who have degrees in finance, so it's varied. But I think the more senior you are, the less important the degree is, and more important the experience you have. And if we need experts with technical knowledge, deep technical knowledge, we can go and outsource that for a particular sector that we're not familiar with.
Exactly. Bamba, did you have something
thank
to
you,
add?
Scott.
Yeah.
A PhD is an important degree. What I would say is if the students have the strength to go and get it, it's always good. If I take my case, I have 2 master degrees, and of course, sometimes you don't plan to end up your career in these development banks. So if you want to go teach, it's my case. So maybe in a couple of years, I want to go and teach in a university, and I'm sure a PhD will be required. Maybe sometimes they can be flexible to consider my experience, but just to be on the safe side, I think I would have maybe stay a couple more years to undertake a PhD and, to have more flexibility after the bank. What would I do? So when it comes to academics and teaching, thank you.
Well, hey, you can always get a PhD later. There have been some other interesting questions. Thank you to those of you that have been, thanks to my panelist colleagues here for answering some of these questions in the chat. Bamba, there was a question for you. As a current PhD student from Nigeria focusing on public finance, it would be great to hear if and how the African Development Bank is supporting national and subnational governments in building fiscal capacity.
Yeah, I thought this question. We have many departments. I mean, it's not my specialty because I'm at the Department of Environment. But I just mentioned what Jessica was saying, these young professional programs, that is a very good way to enter the bank. I was a young professional program. I entered in the bank as a young professional. I forgot to mention it. And like you said, the opportunity is they put you on an array of departments. You can go from environment to policies, to accounting, etc. So in 2 years, you will find your niche where you belong the better. But I don't know if I can answer directly to that question because it's not maybe my area. But like I said, if you are a young professional, they're going to give you the opportunity to visit many departments. And at the end, if your grades are good, I mean, the performance, it's of you to choose where you fit the best to perform. Thank you.
Thank you, Bamba. Anthony, you mentioned, hiring some people that have an MBA or a business background. Obviously many of the students here and many of us here, on the panel, mostly focused on policy. But how important is an MBA or knowledge of hard business skills or the business sector, the private sector?
Yeah, I think the three main skills, if you want to be an investment officer like myself, I think the three main skills that we're looking for, number one is, financial statement analysis. So any class in corporate finance or accounting would probably get you that. Being able to do ratio analysis of a company, super important. I think the second important skill is financial modeling, and not necessarily being able to build a financial model from scratch, but at least being able to know the more advanced functions in Excel and how a financial model works, and not being intimidated by opening, a model with 15 different tabs or 4,000 rows, being able to sit down and be able to pick it apart and understand how it works, whether it's robust enough, how to do scenario analysis so you can test, certain assumptions about, the company's performance in a downside scenario sort of thing. And then the third thing is investing experience. So either on the job or in the classroom. I know a lot of universities offer sort of a mock investment, programs where you can get actual experience, pitching ideas or, researching investments on behalf of, a university's fund or something along those lines. So that's really useful experience to have. And then, so I don't think an MBA is absolutely necessary. And I think even just doing the level 1 exam of the CFA program would really, really set you apart. And the nice thing about the CFA program is that you don't have to enroll in a university. You don't have to sit in a classroom. It's all self-taught. So you enroll for the exam, you receive the books and the study guide, you prepare on your own, and then when you're ready, you take the exam. And I think just having level 1 CFA on your resume really sets you apart, regardless of what your academic credentials are. It really shows that you're dedicated and have the right skills to be able to hit the ground running as an investment officer.
That's great. That's interesting to know. I was trying to formulate a question in my head for any of you. It's interesting because you've got a lot of students on the call. So not a lot of people that are necessarily mid-career. There might be some people here that are mid-career, but they're in school, so they have the chance to take the courses they need right now. But I was going to ask a question about like upskilling, like where do you see that you've had to evolve since you've graduated school? Like when have you had to upskill? How did you make that decision? And what was it that you learned, if anything?
I don't know if I can jump in and try to answer.
Sure.
For my case, I mean, I think I didn't prepare myself to join international development banks. Sorry, maybe I can reveal a little bit some family stuff, because my wife is working right now at the World Bank as a specialist. And our son just joined FAO as a young professional and is based in Barbados. So we are becoming a family. But I'm saying that what I have seen so far, sometimes you can get by chance. I mean, it wasn't a plan or a focus during the studies, but it's very important to get the information. And, this kind of what we are doing right now is very important. Of course, in one now, it's difficult to say, but the preparation is, and to have a mentor or somebody to advise you, to gear you. If I get the example of my son, after the bachelor from Boston University in economics, he didn't know exactly what to do. And by discussion, we just trying to make him focus on fisheries and aquaculture. So he got a master in fisheries and aquaculture because, through my development background and experience, I knew that this area going to be a focus and very important. So advising and having people to, we call it in French, orientation, is very, very important. Thank you.
I can come in slightly. So I joined the bank as an analyst, and I actually joined through the analyst program, which is like the, it's like the YPP in the bank, but even for those who are younger than the YPP. So I joined as an analyst, and then I moved to becoming a specialist and now a senior specialist. And what I realized is with every role, the expectations from me and my tasks have also changed. So to give you an example, when I was an analyst, my role was to know the models really well, be very proficient in the data, be really good at doing the analysis. Okay, when I moved to the next stage, it was not just that. It was also sort of starting to think about what models do others use and being able to comment. And, within an hour, you get a memo from the minister and you need to comment on this, on whether this is a sound policy. Okay, so you need to have that experience of having worked in 20 different countries to be able to comment. Now, where my role is a lot also about trying to figure out what is the new and cutting edge work of the World Bank in this area. It's no longer pensions, it's much broader demographic aging. So I'm using this as an example to say that I guess this happens in all our careers. You're not expected to do just the one thing you started with really well your entire life. Your roles change. And so I actually don't even open Stata. And my first year on the job, this is all that I did. But I know enough to know if someone gives me a wrong number, I will have a hunch that something's off here. And that's what my role demands now. So is that upskilling? Sort of, because I've had to think differently about what my role is. I've had to learn different skill sets, and a lot more of what Jessica was saying, soft skills. And to be honest, I just have to be very humble that this is some things that I don't know, and I have to count on other colleagues who have expertise, but asking the right questions so that then I can learn from their expertise and put an informed opinion. I read somewhere in a McKinsey report that you deplete your skill sets every 5 years. That really stayed with me. And it just gives you a sense of, how much we all need to upskill ourselves. And it's different things for different people. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need to go back and learn Python, but I definitely have to do something different and can't be doing the same thing over and over again and think that I'm going to have a career for the next 30 years.
Yeah, thank you, Himanshi. There was a really good question. Sehaj Zhang said, could I know the recruiting process? How many interview rounds do we have? Does HR lead the interview, or is there a director of a team that interviews you? Yeah, I mean, the nitty gritty of exactly how a recruitment process happens, to the extent you are all aware of this now, that would be helpful to know from any of these students, especially for the YPP.
So the YPP program at the bank, that's actually fairly competitive, and there are multiple rounds. I would say, you know, there's first a written round, and then there's interviews, at least 3, but it can be more. And I know that some of those interviews also have to be in person. There were exceptions during COVID. So YPP is a bit like that. But then, I mean, at the bank, it's also a little bit, it's also a little fluid. Like my recruitment process was just one interview, because I had worked as an intern. So they saw me on the job working for 6 weeks. So they were pretty convinced that and I know exactly what the team does. And it was just one interview with the practice manager, and that was it. So it varies. But YPP, it's a very stringent process, and you actually have to write a written exam. It's like analytical questions, English, and logical reasoning.
Himanshi, when you mentioned 3 rounds of interviews, why are there 3 rounds? Like who has to interview you, and are the questions different?
They are. I think so. There's one. So at the YPP program, you're not assigned what we call global practice. So the bank has 14 global practices. You have water and sanitation, you have social protection and jobs, you have infrastructure, you have urban. The YPP program is basically interviewing you for any of these positions, and they can place you wherever there's a demand. So they're not necessarily looking to ask you just water questions, okay? They're really looking at whether you have the analytical mind that even if they put you in some other team where there's a need, you'll be able to learn on the job. So there's some questions that look at the technical skill sets. And I know last year, there was someone who was actually asked to, within 2 hours, run a Stata code and analyze a given data set. Everyone had to do that same data analysis. So that was a technical round. Then there was a round on, where they're asked to, this is the World Bank's mission statement, and this is the country that you're talking about. How are you going to advise the ministry on this reform? So this is more of like, how do you convince policymakers? What arguments do you use? And then there's also sort of a personality round where I think they also put you in teams. I think they change the format every year, but there's always a technical round and one policy round.
That's great. Anthony, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I responded in the chat, but basically all the DFC jobs are posted on the usajobs.gov website, so check that out. I think you can set up alerts if you know you want to look at job offerings at the DFC. I think the most important thing to remember is that our HR department does the first cut. So they look at all the applicants who come in. They check to make sure that the minimum requirements for that position have been met. And then anyone who has met all the basic requirements then gets referred to the hiring manager, and that's the hiring manager's discretion, how many interviews and how many people they want to invite for an interview. I do want to stress, though, that it's really important on your resume to spell out exactly how you satisfy those minimum requirements, because there was one guy who recently applied for a job that I was filling, and he was very upset to learn that he didn't fulfill the requirements. And I talked to HR, and it said that he didn't fulfill the minimum 1 year of financial modeling experience. And I looked at his resume and I saw that he had it, but HR said, no, he didn't have it because he was only at that job from August till September, or September to August. So he only had 11 months experience instead of 12 months. So they were very, very meticulous about checking, exactly how many months of experience people had. So I just stress, whenever anyone's applying for DFC, make sure you read the job announcement, make sure you show on your resume that you clearly satisfy all those requirements, because otherwise you won't get through the first screening, which is the HR department.
Yeah, thank you. I've definitely heard that from almost any federal agency that uses USA Jobs. You have to be so very specific. You have to meet all the knowledge, skills, and abilities for each thing. You have to meet it, and you have to articulate how, and otherwise you won't get through that first round. It's so competitive. Jessica, you went through the PMF program. That seems like how you launched, yeah? So would you, I mean, for those interested in government, like, yeah, that's probably one of the better, obviously it's the better way to go, but yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
it's similar. You have a multi-step process, and I haven't followed, exactly how it works now, but generally I think there is a first screening that cuts the vast majority of people out of the process, and that includes written essay and sort of responding to various questions to try to weed out people who sort of have good judgment, basically. And then I don't know if they've returned to in-person since COVID, but then there's usually sort of like a full day interview for the people, who've made it through that process. And then in a way, it's interesting because then you're kind of an open candidate, which doesn't happen very much in the US government. Normally you're applying for a really specific job, but as a PMF, different agencies can access your resume and reach out to you. And so that's part of how I ended up at an agency where I wasn't anticipating working, but they found that my qualifications were things that they were looking for at that time. And so, yeah, PMF is a great way to get into the government, and sort of the YPP program of federal government.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great way because you go in with a graduate degree, you go in at a GS-9 minimum, and within a year, you're usually GS-11. And then within 2 years, well, 2 years is the PMF program, but then you almost always stay on that extra year, right? Most PMFs matriculate, right?
You convert to competitive status after 2 years unless something goes really wrong.
Convert. That's the term I wanted to. Yeah, that's what I was fishing for. Yes, and then you're just launched. You're at GS-11, GS-13, very good salary no matter where you are. Yeah. Let's see. Thank you also, to the other questions that have been answered. There's been some other questions about ESG certificate. There was some other questions about the YPP that I brought to the group. Questions on working at the independent accountability mechanisms of the development banks. So thank you to Imanchi and Jessica for answering those questions. Jessica, you've been really prolific with answering other questions as well. So yeah, thank you very much for that. I don't know, we only have a couple minutes left. Any other parting thoughts that you might want to share? Any of you?
I would say find something that you really enjoy doing and that you're really passionate about. I know that's seems obvious, but I really love the work that I do, and it really motivates me. And I'm just super happy to be where I am today. And if you're looking for a career that is very tangible and that delivers impact that's meaningful, I think impact investing and development finance is an excellent way to go.
I would say that there are times when I wish that I had paid more attention and taken more of the classes that I really cared about in school, and not sometimes we try to not shy away from the really difficult classes, so whatever is difficult for you, but I realized that the kind of bandwidth I had to explore when I was in school, you just don't get it in the job market once you're there. You're essential, especially in sort of the roles like we're talking about. Yeah, once you get a staff position, you're pretty much asked to lead. Starting even from an analyst position, there's no scope to let's figure this out. You are essentially put in front of the client. So to the extent possible, I know everyone's always worried about job market, but your school is a great way to really learn from your professors, take some of those challenging classes, get out of your comfort zone, because it's really gonna make you feel very empowered when you're back in the job market, and you're gonna feel like even if there's something hard that comes your way, you're ready for it.
Jessica,
Bamba, anything?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Scott. I think there is a gap between the classes that you are taking and what you're gonna find on the field. And we did a small assignment at the University of Wisconsin. I went back there, and they were asking us, among all the classes that we took, can we remember the classes that we found the most, how to say it, I mean, useful according to our jobs that we are performing right now. And I remember that what I said was a discussion class, because once I joined the bank, of course, all these biology statistics are tools, but most of the first jobs that I was doing is just around the table that people are discussing and trying to find way of issues that are on the table. So this persuasion, this discussion is very important. So go to science classes, but consider this as just a tool, because what you're going to find in the field is really something that may even sometimes surprise you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bamba. Jessica, any last words?
Yeah, final words, you know, always think about who you might know or who you might be able to know, who you can get coffee with, you can find out about. I think the diversity of jobs that exist in this space is much greater than you can imagine when you're not, you know, in one of those jobs. But meeting people and talking about what they do, you'll get a lot more sense for places where you might fit in well in terms of your interests and skill sets. Look for mentors. Think about who is going to take you with them while they are going, you know, the places they're going. You know, think about the people you want to be 10 years later in your career, and, you know, try to work with those people as much as you can. And my last advice is just to, you know, to stay a little bit flexible. Look at what the opportunities are that actually exist for you. Don't get too trapped in thinking there's one perfect place. It might be something that you didn't expect.
All right, that's great. I really appreciate all the advice that you've all shared. Thank you so much to Anthony Randazzo, Himanshi Jain, Jessica Isaacs, and Bamba Diop for being on the panel. I really appreciate your time and advice. Thanks for answering all the students' questions. And thanks to Carmela for inviting such great panelists, Carmela LaBianca, my colleague. Final thing, the recordings are all posted on this document that I just put into the chat. Yeah. If there's any other questions, I'd put their LinkedIn, the panelists' LinkedIn on, you know, on the chat. So use your discretion if you want to follow them or actually invite them to connect. It's up to them to decide whether or not to connect with you or not. But thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a good afternoon, evening, day, week. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.